the morning sunrise. In Lion's Gate 'neath the tall fir trees, on your face feel the ocean breeze. Feel the magic that's in the air, in Lion's Gate the fair.
Thank you, Nurgway. So, greetings and welcome to this special panel discussion edition of the Lion's Den, broadcasting from the Barony of Lionsgate in the Kingdom of Antir. I am Kinrick, Baron of Lionsgate, on this very lovely, warm evening, which I happen to love. Some people aren't so happy with it. If you're in California where it's really, really, really hot, like 120 Fahrenheit, I feel sorry for you. I am sure that Duchess Kiva's husband Ulf is happy, like I am, that the Canadians are ahead of the Golden Knights, 1-0. If you're a hockey fan. And happy Father's Day to all of the fathers today, of which I am one and had a lovely dinner, and my kids are amazing. So, throughout its 55-year history, the SCA has changed and grown, ever evolving as we perceive each other, our values, and history differently. Each of our guests tonight have had their own journeys, their own evolving sense of self and expression. So many of us join the SCA to explore aspects of ourselves, yet we are all players and come onto site as individuals with our own experiences and perspectives. Tonight, our panel represents 8 voices playing our game throughout their own experiences, living on the trans spectrum. Our guest host and moderator tonight is Mastra Rosa Marcella, member of the Order of Defense. She brings with her a lifetime of experience in the SCA through playing in at least 3 kingdoms, Midreal, Drakenwald, and Antir. She is recognized both for her prowess with a blade and her service. We are so excited that she agreed to take lead today. Please join us here in the Barony of Lionsgate as we learn more about the SCA through the eyes of our guests and hopefully come away with new ideas on how to make our game safer and more fun for everyone. Please, Maestra, take it away.
Thank you. Hello, so I'm Mastra Rosa Marcella. I just came out trans, she, her last March in 2020. The year's a blur because of COVID. I am 2nd generation and neurodivergent. I've been in the SCA since I was 5 because of the Air Force. So we started in Volunteer, ended up in Drakenwald, played so far the most in the middle. My parents are still there. They were landed Baron and Baroness for North Shield of the Middle Kingdom. My dad's a Master Defense Pelican. My mom's a Pelican, and I'm a Master Defense. And then my sister still plays along with her wife. Very happy, very diverse family, as much as we can be in the queer community. And actually, I called out my parents, and they just found out they have ADHD too. So that's been fun learning all together. But I'm the only trans kid in my family, and I am very, very happy to host this panel. I kind of helped out with the one last year that we first had for the actual DEI Society panel. So I'm excited to be a part of it again. So I would love to introduce my panels. We unfortunately did have one drop out, just life things, but she would totally have been here. She was also a Master Defense and came out after about a couple years ago too. So she is unfortunately not here. But I would like to introduce the rest of our panelists that have been so gratefully and graciously, words are hard for me, to join me today. As you can see, a lot of them are from Antir. It's like I'm biased or something, but it just also helps because Lions Den is hosting it. It's an Antir Shire and the Barony of Lions Gate. I very much appreciate that you allow us to be here and during Pride Month and everything. So let's start with introductions, and I will go with, this is why I'm not a Laurel, because I can't. Thegn, how do you say, what? Thegn Samii?
Thegn.
Thegn?
So So I am Thane Samson Muskovich. I am one of the two landed barons of the barony of Carrigbon in the Middle Kingdom, or Midrealm, as we often call it. I have been out as trans since 2012, although I started questioning gender much earlier than that. I'm currently the person that does the Trans 101 for the SCA panel, or not panel, but class, that discussion thing. So I have a strong interest in queer history. I do a little of everything in the SCA. I'm a heavy fighter, a fencer, an archer, cook, do a lot of feasts. And that's kind of just a little bit about me. And then my pronouns, of course, are he and him.
You could choose next since I can't read names.
Tvorimir?
Gotcha. I am Vechnic Tvorimir Danilov. I am a Pelican volunteer. And I kind of enjoyed how Kenrick commented that many of us joined the SCA to explore other pieces of who we are. And I was out trans in the SCA decades before I was able to do surgical stuff and shift that direction, both as pieces, in my full life. And it was my welcome in the SCA that led to that. I am actually intersex, and so was snipped when I was quite young and then had to recorrect. And I'm gonna go to Arnóra.
Hi, I'm Arnóra Durinsdottir. I'm on tier in the Principality of the Summits. I have been out as trans, she, her pronouns, since like a month after Rosa came out. In the SCA, I started as a heavy fighter. I'm still a heavy fighter. I'm learning how to re-fight since transitioning because hormones are weird. I'm also largely into cooking and feasts.
It's so good.
You know, I mean, I haven't killed anybody yet, so I call it a win. And I'm also a sergeant of the sergeant at arms for the barony of Adiantum, which, for those of you located outside of Summits, is mid-Willamette Valley in Oregon. I think that's about it for me. So we'll go with Marcello next.
I'm Marcello. Arnóra and I are married, so we're just down the hall from each other on different computers. I've been in the society for a little over 10 years, and I have always had the same persona, masculine persona, but I only transitioned about 5 years ago. So I also agree with that sort of, no, it was 2016 after I graduated, which is fine. I just shared that this morning, so I know I counted. Yeah, so I have transitioned F to M, but I am now exploring more of a non-binary portion of my persona. So you'll see my pronouns listed as he and they, and I haven't. It's always a process, and I don't know if I'm going to shift more one way or the other. I started.
Spectrum.
I started out as a bard because I'm a real life bard, but I then started fencing and heavy fighting, and I do a little bit of everything because it's cheaper to make your own clothes. So that's where I'm at. Bella.
Hello, I'm Bela de Sicilia, out in the East Kingdom. I think I'm a little unusual in this panel in that I actually have only been in the SCA for 4 or 5 years. I forget who said it's the last year kind of makes it weird. I'm not even sure how many years it's been, but relatively new. I have been out as non-binary and agender specifically for the entirety of the time that I've been participating in the SCA. And I should note, because I framed that in that way, I myself both identify as agender and consider that to make me non-binary, but that is not a universal among folks who have that particular identity. So I want to be clear about that. And in terms of my presence in the SCA, I fence. I actually just participated in my first A&S event in the last couple of months, so that was very fun. And there are several other areas of interest that I'm hoping to develop further once we are operating on a more sort of ordinary fashion. So that's my background. I'm actually not sure if I'm the last person to go. Okay. Oh no, I see Bjorn, or do you go by Bjorn? Okay. So I will pass the baton to you.
I think I am the last person. Hey everybody, I'm Bjorn. I use he, him pronouns. I am in the barony of Thor's Mountain, Kingdom of Meridies in the southern US. Like Bella, I've been in the SCA about 6 years, since 2015. So also a little bit newer, especially than some of the folks also on the panel. I actually transitioned back in 2010. I guess transition is a weird word because it's, you know, a continuing sort of thing for a lot of people, but I've been out and, you know, living as male since 2010 and have always been out as trans in the SCA. I'm real loud about it, especially being kind of in the South. I like to be loud about it so that other trans people who might be a little scared are like, hey, there's another trans person. My thing in the SCA is inkle weaving and like Baltic pickup weaving. I love fiber arts. I've recently gotten into heavy fighting. Actually, I was supposed to get my helmet at the practice that got canceled back last March, the last practice before. So I've been to some practices before, really excited to get started on that. Another thing that I do in the SCA, like Samii, I teach a Trans 101 class down around here and a trans history class that I taught for the first time last year. So yeah,
Awesome.
That's me.
And again, thank you so much for introductions and where you're from, how long you've been transitioning. I'm also very loud and proud, and everyone here is very open about it. With that little disclaimer, if you do know somebody that is trans, don't tell anyone unless they've given you permission to that you can tell people. A lot of us are not safe to come out openly as trans. We feel comfortable enough and actually have privileges and friendships with people that we can come out and be open about it. That is my disclaimer. I've been posting a lot about that. If you know someone that is trans, non-binary, intersex, or whatever, please don't out them. I'll just keep it at that. We're not going to go dark. Anyways, so the first question, and I'm just going to kind of bounce around and see how the time's going on, if we can have everyone answer or just a few at each question at a time. Most panels have been like 3 or 4 of us answer questions, just kind of conserve on time so we can actually get through more of them. So depending on how long-winded you are will depend on how many people answer these questions. So the first question I wanted to kind of talk about and is, what is the trans spectrum? And I would like Amir to start off with that one. You always have a good answer.
Like that.
Never mind, I put you on the spot.
Yup.
Oakley dokley. So at the trans 85 level, the trans 101 level.
Just in general, what's the spectrum?
Jump.
What's
Okay,
included?
so-
What's
The
included?
101
what's-
level, probably.
101.
All right.
We
So-
know what it is. Let's let
Yeah.
other people know what it is.
Okay. Cisgender is not an insult. It means that you are still consistent with where you were. I am actually eagerly awaiting a t-shirt that is coming to me that says "Cisn't" because I'm intersex and it's yellow with a little purple circle. And I totally tagged one of my other native intersex friends with this shirt because I am determined by the American Medical Association to be genetically biologically non-cis. From there,
Thank you.
we have all the hormone soup and all the things that we have learned about brain formation and function and muscle grouping and secondary characteristics that make me wonder how many other people in the trans world also cisn't. None of this is straightforward and none of this is clear because research takes money and money takes high interest groups. So those of us who have less of the power usually have less of the answers. So from there, we have, when I was young, the definition of trans was that you were cis and you went all the way over to trans. That they really thought in terms of an all male and an all female, and you were going to jump to the other side. And people who wanted to stay in the middle had to pretend that they didn't have the money for the bottom surgery. They couldn't quite afford that. They were going to get to it because there was no comfort zone in allowing somebody to be anywhere other than spot A and spot B. Generations since then have called that out, which has got to be huge reassurance to some of the people that I knew in college who identified their gender as gender bleep. Which actually, if you think about it, is a really good description. So at this point, we have people who may consider themselves all the way on one side, all the way on the other side, somewhere in between, nowhere on the spectrum entirely, finding themselves in different zones on different times, sometimes within a day. Gender is a whole lot of biochemistry, and biochemistry is a soupy mess. So have grace for where everyone is and where they're going, because our biochemistry does not sit nicely in one place. I think that should fairly well do.
So yeah, and if in modern terms, we have a lot of gender fluid, non-binary, trans men or trans mass, trans femme, because it's all kind of a spectrum, and that we got to remember. So Marcello.
The definition kind of that I use is that if you were assumed a gender at birth and you are still working with that gender and it feels comfortable to you, that is cis. If you are anything other than that, we welcome you to use the trans label if you would like to. So if sometimes you feel different or you completely want to binarily change gender, great. If you want to invent your own new gender, if you want to throw out gender entirely, where's the return service for gender? I don't know, but I would like to. That's what I usually do.
I'm going to pronounce your name, Thegn?
So my actual name is Samii. My title is Thegn. So Samii.
Samii. Thank you.
So just use Samii.
Not a herald.
It's all good. I chose a different title because I could. So my explanation of gender is, and those of you who are Doctor Who fans will appreciate this. Gender is wibbly wobbly, timey wimey. It is interconnected and not, and it's just it's a big spaghetti ball of yes. Like for as many trans umbrella for as many people who are on the trans spectrum, there are as many definitions of what trans is and what transness defines. So it really is like it's how you identify, and that's kind of the short answer of that. You are who you are.
I just want to add, if we have time.
Oh, go ahead.
That that despite the name of the panel, which is completely appropriate, some non-binary folks choose not to adapt the trans label, which I think is actually important to know. They sort of feel that they're not cisgender because they are not someone who identifies with the gender that was assigned at birth, but they don't necessarily view themselves as transgender. Some folks are of the mindset that non-binary and sort of the spaces in between might be its own thing. So I just want to make sure we touch on that when we're talking about the spectrum.
Yep.
Yeah, and very much intersex. Most intersex people do not consider themselves trans. we have all kinds of pithy ways we refer to that original alteration, but there's the thing there too. Fair.
And you can see this also in our pride flags. Like some of us want to identify as gender fluid or intersex. And we have a trans flag and we have non-binary flags because we do have this broad spectrum of we identify as these, but we don't feel like we have the necessary experiences to be trans, I guess. I don't know. It's that's why it's a spectrum. Anyways, next question that I wrote up. As you saw that I posted in there, I put in AMAB and AFAB. Quick, I'm just going to go over the quick little definitions that get thrown around a lot in the trans community: non-binary, gender fluid. I been trying to get this in the Marshall community to use because it's important with bone structure if we've had 2 puberties or 1 puberty, which we can talk about here in a second too. But I thought this was important to kind of talk about certain definitions that we have. And so I'm going to kind of make these 3 questions one big question, so all of us can talk about on different definitions. AMAB and AFAB, which are assigned male at birth, assigned female at birth, which is usually what your gender marker on your birth certificate happens to be. The chat I noticed in the chat they talked about intersex ways of that too, which I really appreciate that you shared that. Thank you. There's also other things, dead name versus our birth name, and then gender dysphoria are some major things that most trans people relate to. I do birth name because I still have a very loving family. My mom and dad are very supportive over saying dead name because it actually hurt my mom. So all my past, unless it's in the SCA, like persona wise, I still talk about Martin because it's like we change personas once in a while. There's cis people that do it. They're like, I'm tired of this name, I'm going to change my name. So I just didn't really kill off Martin because Martin got me to where I am. So that's some of how we'll treat it. Unfortunately, a lot of us lose family and friends when we come out as trans, so we end up calling that our dead name because we don't want anything to do with that past. But I will let someone else talk. Nora's been quiet, so I'm going to pick on you on trans definitions. Let's make that question of what certain definitions we want people to know about.
Goodness, there's so many.
Should I come back to you?
Well, I'm maybe like, are there specific definitions you want, or
let's specifically go off of gender dysphoria if you have it or don't have it, because not all trans people have it, but I know it gets talked about a lot.
Yeah, so gender dysphoria is not, it's hard to describe for me. So for me, my biggest source of gender dysphoria was my voice, and pre-transition my beard, because I'm an on-tier Norse person, so of course I had a big bushy beard. And so when I saw that, I saw this person who wasn't me, but whose body I was inhabiting, is I think the best way that I could describe general gender dysphoria in my experience. It's going to be different for everybody. Everybody's going to have different dysphoric triggers, and people are going to have different ways of ensuring they don't experience that dysphoria.
How have you experienced it more in the SCA? I guess I can have a good follow question on, because I have an answer for that one recently. Let's do gender dysphoria in the SCA. Like, how has garb affected you? How has other things like that? So we can, I think that'd be a good way to kind of tie it in with the SCA, because I have a story recently because of that.
So for me, I think the most important thing for not feeling that dysphoria was making sure I got typically feminine garb made, because going from, you know, male to female, the garb styles, at least for Norse, are similar but different. You know, you've got tunics and pants versus apron dresses. I did discover that my tunic doubles as an underdress for my apron dress, so that kind of works out if they're long enough. That said, I transitioned shortly, or started transitioning shortly into the pandemic, so I don't have a lot of experience in the SCA as Arnóra. But I think the biggest thing is garb, and it was super important for me to change specifically my fighting garb, so that when I am doing the thing that I do the most, when I'm on the tournament field, and you know, I see pictures or videos of me fighting, I'm going to see Arnóra fighting and not Thorsten fighting. So that's, I think, the biggest tie into the SCA that I can do. For me specifically, aside from starting to research period Norse makeup,
Ooh.
which is basically just charcoal. It's just coal eyeliner everywhere. It's awesome.
Oh, that's a good question. Have you had any follow up on that one? Have you had any gender euphoria experiences? And then we'll do-
Yeah, actually.
And Bjorn, get
So-
ready. Think. I said, Bjorn, get ready. You're next. Think.
Okay.
Over Memorial Day weekend, we went and had just sort of like a camp out with some vaccinated friends. And we did bring armor. And one of the most sort of euphoric things I've experienced was being able to put my armor on, put on my new fighting dress that Marcello made for me, and seeing my new lamellar and everything over that, and seeing that it's Arnóra that's going to be on that field making Marcello prince soon.
Arnóra the Shield Maiden.
Fuck yeah. Oh, sorry.
This is a family event. That was our one. That was our one. We're PG-13 now. We have our one
Still
swear word.
PG-13. I just won't
You are
talk
now the
anymore.
Deadpool of the group, so shush. No. Anyways, Bjorn, do you have anything to add about dysphoria and euphoria in the SCA?
Sure. I guess first I'll start by saying I am extremely privileged. I pass for all, that's a problematic word in my world, but I pass really well as male. No one knows I'm trans unless I tell them, so I'm very privileged in that. Dysphoria wise, in the real world, and also the SCA, I want to say that I don't think dysphoria is a requirement for being trans. And also that, you know, you may realize you're trans because of gender euphoria. You know, maybe someone refers to you with a pronoun you're not used to, and you're like, oh my God, that felt so good. Just wanted to point that out as well. As far as the SCA goes, I can't really speak from personal experience, just because I've always been, you know, respected in my identity, because I went in and I you know, went in as male, and I've not transitioned in the SCA. But just some things that maybe like my local group is doing, for instance, because, you know, our DEI officer is also trans, and I'm trans, and we're, you know, we're teaching classes and we're doing stuff like this. But we're doing things like our recent gold key officer for clothing for newcomers. They're changing the language there. They're doing things like asking if a newcomer would like to wear a dress or would like to wear pants, instead of saying, do you want male garb or female garb? Something even simple like that could help with someone's dysphoria or their comfort level with coming into this game. You know, maybe they're presenting as female in the, you know, real world, but they are maybe closeted, and someone offers them, hey, do you want to wear pants or a dress? They're like, oh my gosh, I can wear pants, even if they're not out, you know. So things like that can help with dysphoria or euphoria for trans folks in the SCA. I wish I had, well, no, I don't actually wish I had more personal experience with dysphoria in the SCA, because I'm very lucky not to, but
that you don't. I mean, it's
Yeah.
hard, and a lot of that is for me. Samii?
So I was actually going to speak up about the martial component because I am, like I said, I'm a fencer, I'm a heavy fighter, and I'm also a martial. So one of the things that I should also mention too, I'm in the process of moving kingdoms. I'm actually currently physically in North Shield, but I'm still mid-realm. Anyways, regardless of that, one of the things that I have poked at some of my fellow marshals about is removing gender from how we ask about personal protection. Like instead of saying, do you have a cup in, do you have a Jill in, it's, are you wearing appropriate personal protection?
Yes.
Because then it removes that element of possibly creating senses of gender dysphoria for people. And it's just saying, are you appropriately protected? Because we want to make sure that you have the appropriate protection, depending, of course, what you are fighting, because the rules for the SCA differ for fencing versus heavy. So there's that. But then also too, like, you know, one of the struggles that we have, and that I had actually coming in, is I've, you know, as I mentioned, I've been out since I started in the SCA, but the first armor I got put in was heat formed armor that had breasts. And I'm just like, this, I mean, great, you know, I'm just kind of rolling with the whole, like, you know, people on the field assume that I'm female, and then, you know, oh, hey, take the helm off, and oh, hi. But it's that whole having appropriate armor that can fit anyone and having those resources available, just the same as we make gold key and garb available for everyone. Like, you know, like Bjorn was saying, like, would you prefer to wear dresses, or would you prefer to wear pants, or would you prefer to wear a skirt, or, you know, whatever. Having options for those who are coming in, especially if maybe they are a smaller individual, and, you know, maybe they are, you know, if they're a smaller individual and they may not identify one way or the other, or what have you, having armor that they can feel comfortable in and confident in, so that we create another safe space. And that's a whole nother conversation entirely too, is creating an environment where it's safe for people to do. So to answer a question that came into the chat, the question was, what sort of torso armor would be ideal for people that want to wear armor that protects without overtly gendering them? Lamellar. Lamellar is great. Plate is great. I had a plate specifically by Bocolo is fantastic. I wore that for a while. I don't bind when I'm fight, which that gets into some weird head dysphoria stuff, because I have not had top surgery yet and I overheat. So there's not just the dysphoria, but there's also medical concerns as well for when I'm fighting.
Thank you. Yeah, that was something I experienced. What was it? Time blindness. A couple weekends ago, I think, when I picked up my sword. I had a good friend, my sword sister, who's Brigate's now provost. Issa and her husband came out to hand me my brand new sword because they made me a gift for transitioning, knowing I'm going to need a lighter weapon. Oh yes, very awe. I was so like, oh, it's beautiful. I'll post pictures later. Anyways, oh my gosh, the dysphoria that I had that day, just putting on an athletic cup, putting on my old rapier garb, because I haven't done anything during pandemic, and I have stuff that people have given me to help me make dresses since coming out, but pandemic, I have no deadlines, ADHD, and no deadlines, nothing happens. But I didn't realize how bad it was going to be until it happened to me. Like, I've had dysphoria with my face and my throat, my voice a lot, but the SCA was such a part of me. I've been a part of it for like since I was 5. Going on just over 31 years now. I've been in the SCA, so to me, garb never made sense. Like, because we have female fighters that fight in male clothing, or pants, I should say, and the hard part with the SCA and medieval times is a lot of clothing got gendered. And that's why our cross-dressing became illegal, and the whole point of the Stonewall riots and stuff too. So trying to get gendered out of clothing is hard, even mentally. Wearing my old garb, I did not realize was going to cause so much dysphoria, but it was the only armor I had to fight in. What I was working at Marcello's and Arnóra's surprisingly won't cause me dysphoria because I haven't worn it in like 10 years. So I have no idea how it's going to fit my body now. So whatever. But we're fixing it, and it's practically new for this body anyway. So it's kind of nice that I have no memories attached to it of Martin.
Mhm.
So dysphoria is like this really weird, hard thing to explain to people. On tier, I am part of the EDI council. We have several different types of people of minorities to kind of help make sure we're not missing anything. I actually have two people, Master Keon and another lady that he's working with, that are actually trying to add pronouns to our order of precedence. So that way, when people get scrolls, they can have the proper pronouns on there, and that people don't just assume. That's another big thing with gender dysphoria, is that pronouns are important for us. I hate getting sirred on the phone all the time at work because of my voice. Even though I have so many cis women say, it's like, I've heard women with your voice, but then they follow up, they get stirred also. It's like, yeah, it's not helping me. I know, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but dysphoria is huge. And as you can see, I'm wearing my Turkish because I feel the most femme in it. And you can see, like, we kind of, not all of us, but and it's a hard thing to do in classes when you're talking about garb and trying to get gender out of garb. That it's even hard for us mentally, because I didn't realize, like, until I wore my old garb, like how bad that was going to affect me. And imagine somebody else. Some people don't. It's a very different spectrum. Let's go Bella, dysphoria in the SCA.
I
Or euphoria, which I haven't had yet. Sorry.
Sure, no worries. In terms of dysphoria, I don't experience much physical dysphoria. I mostly experience social dysphoria. So I will echo what I think I think you, Maestra Rosa, mentioned of, if I'm just sort of walking down a path and someone who doesn't know me starts, trying to get my attention by yelling "milady" at me repeatedly, like, that doesn't feel good for me, even though I understand what they're cueing off of. I hang out in fencer spaces, as you noted. Lots and lots of people wear sort of the same clothing. When I was first starting out, in fact, all my garb was just clothing I'd like borrowed from male identified friends. And so I didn't have that particular piece of the experience. But I have experienced a significant amount of gender euphoria around people really specifically trying to respect my gender identity. My name is both agender and documentably agender, which is no mean feat because it's also a Jewish persona. So I'm extremely proud of that and really appreciate the support I was given to set that up. My AOA award, which is behind me, although I don't think it's quite in frame, apparently the look on my face as it was presented in court, and it's written in Hebrew because I have a Jewish persona, and I sort of noticed as it was being read that the tenses were changing from line to line. Hebrew is a very gendered language. There are many different ways that that's been addressed, both within the SCA and more broadly in sort of Hebrew-speaking cultures. But the scroll behind me alternates between masculine and feminine conjugations each line, as a way to represent the fact that I don't identify within a binary, and that just really just my entire face lit up when I realized what was happening, and I felt so seen, and it was just a really incredible experience. And it made me
Look
really
at the look on their face. Look
Mhm.
at the look. That's the euphoria.
Marcello, your turn.
I've had less dysphoria, but I had the moment that I finally started to figure out that I was trans did happen in the SCA, and it is kind of, it probably could be described as dysphoria. So we were at the West Coast Culinary Symposium when it was in Three Mountains in 2016. And we'd had a great weekend of learning about medieval food and cooking and conversation and whatever. And we were sitting around chatting after the main feast on Saturday night. And somebody got up and said, okay, to help convince people that we should go do the dishes and not just women should only do dishes, we're going to have Baron Finn take off his shirt and encourage all the men to take off their shirts and go do dishes. And like, I didn't it didn't really, I didn't process it in the time, but I had this feeling of like, oh, I can't do that. Why can't I do that? And it took me several weeks to kind of go through why that wasn't okay or acceptable or whatever. And that helped me to work through, oh, maybe I should transition. I will say that I have more euphoria than dysphoria on average. And so having something like, but it does tend to be a social thing for me as well. So like if I'm, one time I specifically remember I was in an airport on the way to a conference or something wearing a nice suit and hat, and somebody served me before I transitioned. I'm like, oh yeah, that, you know, that's the feeling. But I have been able to have most of the surgeries that I want, and so I don't deal too much with physical discomforts. And thank God I don't have to deal with my ears anymore. They're so hot. Yeah. So yeah, I think that while many I'd like to reiterate that you don't have to have dysphoria to be trans. And if you don't have dysphoria, you can still be trans, and you are trans enough if you decide that you are trans. And that while many people do experience a physical sensation of dysphoria, a lot of it is socially constructed, and it's how people address you and how people perceive you and how you interact with the world. So
I think, thank you. I think Mir, you're the last one, or Sammy, did you go? No. Okay, so Mir, then Sammy.
Okay. Gender dysphoria is having told people for decades, Lord Mir, Lord Mir, Lord Mir, Lord Mir, and still getting people saying she. That got, I anticipate with the beard, this will be less of a problem. Gender euphoria actually was also related to the beard. The first time I realized I could be was, so as intersex, I had enough of the secondary characteristics that I was shaving for compliance because I had these things sticking out front of my chest. And the time at 30-year that somebody left a water barrel out in kind of the square. And I've seen way too many movies where the guy's shaving at the water barrel and I just had to, and I got caught and it was okay. Somebody I knew saw me shaving and it was okay. The world didn't end. And from then on, it was he in the SCA. Euphoria from hearing the he. Euphoria from finally seeing other people get it. A lot more euphoria.
And Sammy?
So I actually have something for gender dysphoria, but and also euphoria from the same experience. So 5 years ago, I went to SCA 50 year, which first huge SCA event that I ever went, like big event that I ever went to. Also 50 years being held in my kingdom, so why not go? But I stayed on site for that event. And there were shower trailers. Well, at that point, my birth certificate, my driver's license, everything says male. And this is also held in Indiana. So Indiana is extremely conservative, and they were trying to pass their version of bathroom bill, because the only city in the state of Indiana that has any sort of protections is Indianapolis, and I was not in Indianapolis. I was in a suburb. So I was doing a heckin' concern. And I shared my concerns with one of my campmates who is also a member of the chivalry. And I'm like, I'm doing a heckin' concern about going in the shower trailer. I'm terrified about this because it's the middle of summer in the Midwest, which if you're not familiar with that is a wet heat. It's very humid and hot.
Don't miss it. I don't miss it. Sorry, I just don't.
Yeah. Pacific Northwest, yada. Anyways, though, but I was doing a heckin' concern because I like taking a shower. I like to be clean because, otherwise you have things like yeast infections happen and those aren't fun. but I expressed my concerns to this member of the chivalry. He's like, if you want, I will go with you. Like, not in the shower, because that would just be awkward, but like into the trailer, just to make sure that no one bothers you. And the first day I was in there, I'm like, this is mildly awkward for me because this is male dominated space and I have not had top surgery. And well, I am missing dangly bits. This is awkward. But everything was okay. And I had my shirt and shorts, I did my shower, and I left. And there was no questioning about, are you valid in this space? Zero. And I got more confident over the course of the event. And I was like, okay, cool, and do the thing. But I mean, it's one of those things where it's like, that was a thing. Like I said, I've been trans. I was out as trans before I started in the SCA. So I got to walk in with my shiny new person. I've always been Samii. That's a name I've had. Like, Maestra Rosa was mentioning about the concept of the dead name. I don't have a dead name because my legal name is still my legal name. I was thankfully gifted a neutral gender name at birth, with the exception of my middle name, which I don't use, but I retained it because it's in honor of my grandmother. And I have my personal reasons for that. So, having, it always gives me this little thrill, like whenever I hear, His Excellency or Lord Samson or Lord Samii, because it's just reaffirming that thing, especially as a fighter, because like I said, I will fight in my binder when I fight as a fencer, because it doesn't really bother me. But heavy fighting, there's a lot more armor on, it's more hot. So it's a thing. So I'm walking around and I've still got my chest, and it makes me question every time I have to, like, when I'm in that in-between space where I've got my tunic on to getting my armor on, because I have a very visible chest. And it's just that whole, like, oh, hey, it's just Samii, he had me, and I clock as masculine, and it's this weird up and down space.
I'm going to kind of follow up with that part on the thing. I have on here about pronouns and stuff, but I kind of want to follow, what did you do with your past persona? As you can see, some of us came out later in life, even though technically in 5th grade I knew, but I just didn't have the words. The 90s did not have Google. Sorry. So a lot of us, as you can see in our mid-30s, there's trends, which is weird. And ADHD people like finding these patterns, but that we have like decades between, depending on when we found out about our gender dysphoria, or the term we need. Even though we don't all have gender dysphoria, the medical society says we have to have it to even transition if we want to. So in some aspect, we will have some sort of gender dysphoria, because we have to medically to qualify for any of our surgeries or anything that we want to do. Things you cannot ask a trans person because of this. What surgeries are you having? Please don't ask us. We might share, we might tell. I have a whole blog for this, so people can ask questions like that, so that way they want to ask those questions. Like, I am very open, but you have to be very careful, because some of us don't go through those surgeries because those don't make us dysphoric. But anyways, what did you do with your past persona in the SCA, if you transitioned during the SCA? If you did not, how? I'll have a better question later. Anyways, Samii, you do have something to add.
So, yep, I was going to interject real quick before we go to the next topic. So another reason why why it would be inadvisable to ask someone about their surgery if they are under the trans umbrella is because it also can run afoul of the SCA's discrimination and bullying policies. Just don't ask. It's none of your business, and depending on how that conversation goes, it could be you having a conversation with your Kingdom Seneschal and the other person, and or your crown. Just don't do it. It's not worth it.
If they're not close enough that you would ask them about any other surgery they're having, it's not your deal.
That's a good one. So anyways, who, by raise of hands, who actually changed their persona coming up? Fine. Who changed their names? That's the better question. Who had to go through like a name change or anything? No? Am I just, is it just Arnóra and I? Okay, we'll share our experience. I don't have much. Both Arnóra and I was trying for a fun question. It didn't work.
I have an anecdote, but that's if that's permissible. But I will wait until you do your thing.
So Arnóra and I both came out right in the middle of the pandemic, or right at the beginning. We came out at the beginning of the pandemic. So we've been transitioning behind closed doors, no SCA events, no practice. And her and I both fight. Her and I both, it's been interesting because no projects are getting done. So there's nothing going on. But at the beginning of the pandemic, I did decide that Master Martin Baxter was a persona of mine, and that he got me to my Master of Defense, and now I just have to continue it on, which has been my education and advocacy for trans spectrum in the martial activities, and also learning a lot more about women fighters versus male fighters because I'm going through it. Oh my gosh, have the muscles changed? And that was interesting because a lot of physical therapy went into fixing my knees, and now those muscles have shifted and now I have to re-stretch. So that's been interesting. But I had a lot of people ask me, what are you going to do with all your scrolls? Because since I've grown up in it, I have a lot of scrolls with Martin on it. From Martin of Hawksworth when I was a kid, all the way to Martin Baxter, and now Warder Martin Baxter and Master. And I was like, you know, they're just going to stay Martin, because that was a whole persona that I enjoyed being. And we have people that have fighting personas and dead personas. I ran into people that, which didn't trick like I can be male and female at the time. My brain is slowly catching up to all this. But I always found it interesting, like there was people that specifically fought as male on the field because they wanted to wear pants, and that's how they wore the pants. And then off the field, they wore dresses. One of my dad's students did that for a while. She even like took makeup and drew a goatee on them, and it was very fun. But that's how I free with personas in the essay. It's a lot easier for me to just be like, yes, that was Martin, blah, blah. In real life, though, realizing, especially Mir talks something about the makeups and everything of trans people, that scientific studies and articles have been out there that if you do an MRI scan of a trans person, our brains tend to match the gender that we view ourselves as, which is very interesting. But again, that's how I dealt with my persona. I am now Italian. I'm looking at Venice because I love the dresses. They're so pretty, and silk. It's so pretty. But I used to be a Scottish border reaver, and that's where a lot of my armor was, but I also wanted to do more with fabrics and stuff in my sword fighting. So I had this opportunity to be like, well, I get to use this as an excuse to go Italian now, which is usually a lot easier than cis people trying to switch personas, because it's like, oh, we knew you as blah, blah, blah for so long. It's like, well, now let's try to make it normal for everybody. So that way it's like, hey, I'm switching names. Cool, let's go to that name. Arnóra, did you do anything with your past persona?
Not really, because it took me probably about a year to finally get like my heraldry passed for Torsten's name, and I really like my heraldry because I know somebody mentioned Deadpool earlier. If I rotate my shield 45 degrees, it looks like Deadpool's belt buckle.
Well, I don't have it.
So I'm keeping my polar bears. So like officially, I haven't really gone through changing my name, especially because my surname of Durinsdottir, which is in honor of my knight, is not documentable for 8th century Norse, which is frustrating. But other than that, it's really just like Torsten was me and I was Torsten, but now I've changed my name. My favorite sort of metaphor for that is I got bored with that fighter and rolled a new fighter.
I love that. I love that D&D metaphor.
We use lots of D&D
Right?
metaphors.
I live and breathe D&D. So, but yeah, so basically I just rolled a new character. We're basically in a LARP anyway, so.
And Sammy, you had something to add to all that?
I did. So one of my friends who I'm actually sitting in the basement of is the baronage of Yaraveller in Northshield. So I'm trying to think how to phrase Zer. So Zer Excellency Toussaint / Athelina. So when Z came out as non-binary, Z decided that they were going to use both names. So Athelina is used primarily when Z is not doing martial whatever. And actually, I just talked about this with their spouse before I came on the panel, because we were having a discussion very similar to how Bella was mentioning about some non-binary people may not adopt the trans moniker, and that's actually very much the case with Zer. But what Z does is Z typically will present as a female persona, or feminine persona rather, using Zer pronouns regardless. And in like court situations or high state occasions, or anytime they're really not on the list field, because Z's take on this is Z's armor is Toussaint's, and that is Toussaint's armor. And it doesn't feel right to Zer to pull that away from that persona. But it is still kind of like, it's the same person, just it's situational, and it's a very interesting take on it. Like I really grok it, and I think that's amazing, and it's a way that they can embody themselves, embody theirself, and it's awesome. And it's kind of rambly, but it makes sense, and it's a great way of respecting and embodying their identity, and I think it's just really cool.
Rosa,
Sorry.
I'm thinking about Jadwiga and Casimir.
Okay. What about
So Jadwiga Radomskaya is a late period Polish noblewoman. Her man-at-arms is Casimir. Looks astonishingly like her. And this actually began before Casimir, because Jadwiga could not be doing the physical labor of setting up the tent. So first Jadwiga created the maidservant. And I remember flipping the maidservant crap that I was going to report her to her boss, because she was wearing the boss's earrings. And then Casimir shows up. And so I swear at this point, Raven has this household that are all her. And then it became this household that are theirs, because Casimir felt good. And Casimir started as a way to do the fighting thing, because a Polish noblewoman would not be a warrior. Yeah.
I know some people have been asking in the comments about like why we let heralds, say what our names are allowed to be or not. And that's absolutely not the case. You can register a name to have something registered to attach to heraldic devices and whatnot, and then just use something else entirely. I know several people who have registered something that is not what they go by at all, because whatever. I also know someone else who has a female persona, and then when she's doing setup, uses that's their steward, wearing the pants to do the setup.
Nice.
That is awesome. So I'm going to lead that into, since we've been talking about why are pronouns important, how they affect us mentally, how, when, what. Like I said earlier, I'm just going to do quick and probably not see if I'll add to anything later. But I know Antir is trying to add pronouns to the order of precedence to help with scrolls and heralds and stuff. And we are trying to look at, I know Mir is really good at that with heralding, to the crowd as gender neutral. I was really happy when I first heard those type of cries out loud that he included all that. So from on that, Mir's got their hand up to answer.
So, being intersex, I spent 48 years telling people that if they could figure out my gender, would they please tell me? I had all these little one-liners, but you're not exactly, yeah, I know. If you figure it out, let me know. And for the longest time, my most senior protege said, Mir's a pronoun. Just do them yourself thing. It'll be easier all round. And people had to come up with all these workarounds because I'm intersex. I've got this going this way, this going that way, and I didn't know what to do. Then I started hanging out with my wife. And my wife decided that she enjoyed the he, him. And so I started to get fed a daily diet of he, him. And I discovered I was home. And I was done playing games to make people feel better. And you know what I discovered when I said, all right, guys, you see him, we're done? Yeah, listen, there was just gendered speech. All right, peoples, see him, we're done? They were relieved because they had been doing all this tippy-tappying and they really wanted a nice, safe box. So be aware that people really want a nice, safe box. And I had deprived them of a nice, safe box. And they were so relieved that they got a nice, safe box. So pronouns have that kind of power. If you think about what I just said about the different roles that they had, pronouns have power.
And as you can see, all of us smiling and nodding as he is saying that. Just like I want to add to that, having that box. Nicklin, who's been showing me how to hand sew and everything, really was like, when I first came out, I thought I was just going to do drag because I liked dressing as a woman, but I didn't know why. So when I came out with Roxy and Rose and everything, I actually had Nicklin come up to me. It's like, do you stop being both? I need one or the other because I'm confused. And I'm like, so that really sent me kind of like, what do I want to do with Roxy? What do I want to do? Am I just drag? Why do I always want to be a woman? So once the pronouns started coming around, and I finally was figuring out like Mastra Rosa, and then people were making sure as Marcella and Marcello are male female versions of that word. I didn't know that because I forgot most foreign languages have gendered names and words and stuff. So it was fun when people helped me out make sure my name was gendered properly in medieval time. And it was great when it got registered and everything. It was pretty quick. Because last time I tried to register a name, it got lost in a Penzic trailer and didn't happen until next Penzic. So that was funny. But pronouns, they're great. Bjorn, you had your hands up.
I think pronouns are important because they're not a given. It doesn't matter if you're trans or you're cis, you are making a choice to use pronouns. You might not think about it. You know, you may be comfortable with the pronouns people have been using for you your whole life, but everyone, you know, has a choice of pronouns, even if they don't think about it very hard. So, you know, by, you know, asking someone's pronouns or introducing yourself using your pronouns, even if it's not, you know, maybe a queer space or any sort of, if you're, hi, I'm Kevin or Bjorn, I use he, him pronouns, what's your name? You know, normalizing it, I think, is a big deal that can help. And some people may be uncomfortable sharing their pronouns, and that's also okay. But if you offer yours, and this especially goes for the cis and non-trans people who are listening or anywhere, offer your pronouns. Even if you may feel like it's obvious, they might not be, you know, they're not, because everyone uses pronouns as a choice.
One thing I want to add to what was just being said, particularly for folks who are still figuring out what pronoun feels comfortable for them. You know, there's sort of an ongoing joke in non-binary spaces, like someone brings up, you know, pronouns, it's just like, oh, pronouns, because there's so many different ways in which, you know, people do like boxes, and there's so many different ways in which it ends up being a stressful point sometimes for folks. And it's really valuable to give folks the option to say, you know, prefer not to say, or no pronouns, use my name, or, you know, whatever your space is doing. Those are really, really valuable for folks who are still sorting out what they're seeking, or are starting to become comfortable but aren't comfortable using them publicly yet, or there are just so many different reasons why someone might benefit from that.
Yeah, one of the trans groups that I help host pre-pandemic and soon in person after, we always go around the room and introduce ourselves, and we always say, you know, say your name and your pronouns if you're comfortable, you know, and it's not a big deal. Don't make a big deal of it, you know.
Marcello?
I was going to say that I totally agree with Master Mir about the people like to have a box, but there's a bunch of people that don't fit in the box. And it's great that for those of us who can find the box that feels comfortable, but there's a bunch of people for whom that's not. And honestly, I think that's part of why it's taken me a while to come to terms more with non-binary identity, is because I don't like conflict. And when I transitioned in 2016, it was easier to tell people just say him than to try to decide on any neo-pronouns or they, them, or anything like that. And I still haven't decided if I'm going to change my idea. But like, and you can also be non-binary and use binary pronouns. Like, there's all kinds of options. And so for some people, pronouns have that feeling of gender euphoria and make them feel comfortable and at home. And for other people, there's just like the least irritating, right? And so, or you might see people who have listed 4 or 5 different options, like, well, you can use that anything but she, please, or whatever. But if you ask them and you become friends with them, they will probably have one of those that is the least irritating, or the one that they prefer the most. And so it's just kind of, it depends on the situation.
Yeah, and I did put a fairly long piece to that effect in chat.
Yeah, I saw that.
Sammy?
So one of the things I try to do when I'm introducing myself to a new person is I try to normalize pronoun use. Hi, I'm Thegn Samii, or hi, I'm Sammy. I use he, him pronouns. How may I have the pleasure of addressing you, or how may I address you? Because it doesn't shoehorn anyone into one of those boxes. It allows the person to respond how they wish to respond, whether by offering their pronouns or just offering a name, or whatever, however they feel comfortable. But one of the things that, like I said, one of the things I try to do is I try to normalize the pronoun use, especially for cisgender individuals. Offering your pronouns first it's kind of one of those things where it's, oh, this person is possibly maybe safe to be around, or at least is open to accepting me as I am. And I think that's really important, especially if someone is very early in exploring themselves or exploring their gender identity.
And that is a very universal question you can ask anybody: cis, trans, non-binary, gender fluid. What are your pronouns I can address you by? We're trying to get away with what are your preferred pronouns. We're trying to add, like, because they're not preferred, they are our pronouns. So there's a lot of education in our own community that we're trying to like change vocab and dialogue as we're going, because we're still evolving too. So just ask, hey, what are the pronouns I can address you by? Because I've had to do that when I don't know if they're non-binary or not, because I'm new to them, that I want to make sure as I'm talking to them, or she or he or whatever, that when I use, which I made that comment, I know more about pronouns now than I ever did in high school. Because high school was boring. But that's important on how you're addressing them, that you know, like, I actually went to work to HR because I've been on some DEI task force at work, and I'm trying to do it more professionally and stuff, that I actually went to HR and it's like, hey, can we have our own people, not gender greetings, like train IT to not sir me when you're looking for Roxanne? Like, that was very disheartening and stuff, because I'm
Yeah.
like, I had to say that's me and be like, and the guy didn't even get phased, so it was annoying. But I have a position at work that I have contact with HR, and technically the CEO. I'm just too scared to contact him because that's just weird for me. But anyways, pronouns are very important. I would say if your kingdom isn't doing something about pronouns, to maybe suggest it if you have a DEI office or council, depending on what your kingdom is doing, because they're important. And having that scroll reflect your pronouns, because a good friend of mine that's passed, he was Lady Slime for the longest time because they screwed up his pronoun, because he had a very feminine like name as his SCA name. So it was kind of set. It was a running joke, but that was like in the early 2000s. Now it would be like very important that, hey, no, we want to make sure everyone's got very proper pronouns on their scrolls, because it's important for us. OP is a great place because a lot of people, if you have a good database for that, use that to help recommend awards. My brain just went blank there for a second. Quick loading. So anyways, I have a couple more questions. Actually, one big question, and then I want to open it up to anyone on the side. So if you want to start asking questions in the chat, I would definitely love to hear what you guys want to know about us and in the SCA. But my biggest one is, since coming out, how has the SCA been impactful for you? Negative, positive? How has the group as a whole, since, as you can see, the 7 of us are very open about what we are, because we want to educate and help people that are too scared. I have to double check with our SCA trans group that we have, if we have allow under 18. I don't,
I don't think
know.
so.
We
I
don't.
think so.
Okay, I didn't think so. Anyways, so we do have an adult version, because we do kind of get into more topics that we're still exploring, because there's not a lot of education out there. So that's what us are trying to do. It sucks that we have to do all this extra work to get us out there, but I want to know that anyone that is on the spectrum, anywhere on the spectrum, we do have a very supportive SCA group that's all private and all trans, non-binary, or gender non-conforming. If you want to know, I am very open. I am Roxanne Skelton. I'll type my name in there, or you could probably still find me as Rosa Marcella. I am very open to friend invites on Facebook, because I have a blog that I am now going to research and start writing out my fighting in it, because this is very important to me that we have better training so people don't injure themselves and everything too, because martial arts is my passion. I've been doing it since I was 10. I have a great support out here, as you can see, with Arnóra, Marcello, and Mir. We have the on tier as a whole has been great to minorities, the queer community, people of color. We have a council made of several members of different parts of the SCA to make sure we're all inclusive out here. And we're kind of lucky in the Pacific Northwest to have a very progressive states as they are, so we can kind of express and do a lot more. So on tier, I feel like we've been very lucky in the type of support that we have. Let's start with Bjorn. How has the SCA helped you impactfully, or positively, or negatively?
So the first thing that kind of comes to mind for me, especially because I was, I am very privileged in being, transitioned, and people don't really know that I'm trans unless I say it. One of the really cool things about the SCA group specifically is that, like I said in my introduction, I'm loud about it. I'm not, afraid to talk about my transness in SCA spaces. But the number of people who have come to me, both trans and especially cis people, who have come and said, hey, I've never met a trans person. They just don't know it. However, they're like, hey, I've never met a trans person. Thank you so much for sharing, whatever that I did. And it's been really cool, especially in the Southern US. I'm sure you all have some ideas about how the South can be. But it's been really eye-opening to see folks that I wouldn't necessarily expect come and say, hey, your class was really valuable. I learned a lot. So that's been really fulfilling. It's also, I mean, I guess kind of selfishly as well, you know, by being out myself, because I'm comfortable doing that, is I kind of get the other queer people kind of flock around. We get to have our own little like group. So it's really cool to find, you know, companionship in other queer and trans people in the SCA.
Who hasn't talked? Arnóra, putting you on the spot.
I mean, for me, I haven't really gotten to do SCA since transitioning, so
But we have gotten good Facebook support.
we do, absolutely. So like for me, everything's been online. And virtual things are really hard for me to do in the SCA. There's a lot of disconnect doing stuff virtually. So I haven't been super active as well. In fact, I think this is the first thing I've done since the pandemic started. But as for like interacting with the communities that we do have available, everything from my side has been super positive, you know, and I'm privileged and lucky that I was able to surround myself with an SCA family that is ridiculously inclusive. So I've had nothing but unending support from my SCA family, and then with the addition of being able to, you know, have access to the trans Facebook and the women and gender minority fighters Facebook pages, has really opened my eyes to stuff that, while I presented as a cis male, I didn't realize were issues. So it's not just that like I have a boatload of support. It's really opened my eyes to where other people need support.
Thank you. Marcello, I'm going to pick on you two right now. I don't know
I was
why.
reading the chat. I forgot the question.
How has the SCA supported you?
Oh, right. I will say that
impacted you.
Yeah.
I'm trying to positive or negatively. How has it impacted you?
when I started transitioning, I already knew a couple of people in the summits that had transitioned or were transitioning or whatever. So I wasn't the first one that I knew, which was helpful. But at the same time, I did have a lot of interactions that was like, oh, but I knew you the old way for so long. Even though I didn't change my name, getting people to change pronouns for me was kind of a struggle. And I'm like, and it wasn't ever from people that I'd known for 5 years. It was people that I'd known like a year. I'm like, oh, I've known you. I'm like, we don't hang out. How is this a struggle for you? But and I'm always like, again, I'm conflict avoidant, and so I try not to, you know, like, oh, whatever, if you're trying, just don't make it a big deal. But overall, the SCA has been accepting, but then we'll go to an event in rural Oregon and it's like, well, where can we stop to go to the bathroom? Because I'm not sure that we want to stop at a rest stop in the middle of nowhere, Oregon. And I'm passing now, so that's not a big deal for me anymore. But when I was first transitioning, you know, like, what if we're at a physical site that's actual bathrooms and not biffies? Because porta potties are great because they're one-seaters and there's no gender on them. But then it was like, well, what? The first time I went to Ursulmus and had to go into an actual bathroom, and I have to take all of my armor off to pee, and it's just like, and I don't trust dudes. and I have never really had an interaction that has made me feel physically unsafe, but I still don't trust us, like especially dudes. And a lot of heavy fighters are that. And I had just started heavy fighting, so I was kind of a newer fighter. I am the smallest fighter that I know usually. There's like 2 in the kingdom that might be smaller than me. And just like there was a number of times where I had this feeling of being, you know, not necessarily physically unsafe, but like I don't want to do anything that would cause a problem because I don't think that I could stand up for me.
Self-awareness anxiety.
Yeah, and it's gotten better, and I haven't really had like, again, I haven't had too many purposefully negative interactions, but every so often, even somebody that is accepting and that is, you know, household or family or whatever will say something that's just like, ugh. And it happened again. It happened more at the beginning of my transition. There was a couple times before I was fully out. I have always worn masculine gendered garb, even before I transitioned. And there were a couple of times that people have said, "Oh, well, you're never going to be a dude," before I started transitioning. And so there was that period when I started figuring it out to when I told people, and I heard that a couple of times, and I was like, can you not? You know? So it's, I as a trans person, I have felt safe, but I do find myself noticing the toxic masculinity of the fighting community a lot. And now that I'm kind of stealthily in there, you know, guys see me and I'm just another dude fighter, sometimes they say stuff and I'm like, no, not okay. But mostly it's kind of just out of earshot and not like actually to my face, so I don't usually have a chance to respond to it. Anyway, I rambled, sorry.
That's fine. Anyone else want to add to it? Have experience? I am not surprised. Oh, Sammy.
So, one of the things, and I'm kind of going to address Ten Oak's question too a little bit, because obviously, like, I'm a person of color. I'm a very visible person of color. I'm also very out about my trans identity in the SCA. So those two things are kind of an interesting intersection. It's a thing. I will never go to Gulf Wars ever, because it is physically unsafe for me to be there. As Marcello pointed out, you know, rural Oregon, some places in rural Illinois, there are some downtowns. I cannot physically go there. Because a lot of times if I'm traveling to an event, it's late, especially if I'm going to an event, it is usually late evening or overnight. It is physically unsafe, even though I'm a nearly 6 foot tall, nearly 300-pound black dude. It is unsafe for me. And then you add in the level of being trans. And what if I choose to, because I will sometimes not bind if I'm doing a road trip. Because binding is a thing, and it gets hot, especially if you're traveling in climes where it tends to be a little bit warmer. But in general, it really depends on where you are. Most of the SCAs in the United States, and that is the lens we unfortunately have to look through. And as we know from the last year and a half, 2 years especially, it's not the totality of it, but especially the last year and a half to 2 years, it has been noticeably more problematic for those of us, especially if we are people of color, and also under the trans umbrella to do travel. And it can be problematic. But as far as like but there's also been some positives too. As far as like, you know, the SCA goes, like a lot of, because of the fact that I am so out and I'm so visible in my kingdom, I have a lot of parents who are going like, hi, my child is questioning their gender and exploring their gender. You can have help, please. I'm like, can you help navigate me through this so that I can, and even like, you know, people who have spouses who are exploring their gender, they reach out and say, hey, I got some questions. And there's always the disclaimer of, I am not a medical professional. I have lived experience that I can tell you about and a general awareness of the community as a whole. So I can assist in that manner, but and I can provide feedback. And it's kind of cool to be the quote trans Yoda. It kind of is. It also gets kind of tiring too, because it's one of those things where that's not the only thing I should be known for. I have a wide. It really isn't in my kingdom. It's usually the trans history class, and then my cooking. That's been a thing. But it's that whole, you don't want to get locked into that one specific thing, even though you are the subject matter expert. And those of us who have lived experience are usually locked into that role of being the subject matter expert for that lived experience. So
But
it's a mixed bag.
But it has been nice when they do reach out and they're like, here's some information. I'm not medical. Talk to your doctor, but this is how you start. Because then it's less stress on me. But it's like, if your kid doesn't feel comfortable asking you certain questions, yes, I can have some answers, or at least pinpoint you to the right person, especially depending on how they're transitioning, because I'm not that type of transition or whatever. Mir, did you have anything to add? I wasn't sure.
I do have an interesting parallel. As an incredibly non-period vehicle goes by outside, I apologize. I live just slightly rural, and not all vehicles are muffled out here. So among the Romani, there is an ally position called a captain sometimes. And I ended up quite some time ago as a designee to sort gender orientation stuff and translate between the world outside and a Romani kid or family wrestling that. And I've thought about that in terms of how we end up that trans uncle or aunt, where some family member is wanting so desperately to protect that dear child, that dear person, and comes to us seeking a way to help them be safer, make safer for that dear person. And yeah, it's absolutely emotional labor, and I am so down for that. I am so utterly down for that, because some human is trying and some human's going to feel safer because that human's trying, and I'm good. So it is emotional labor, and thank you for noticing. I just find it a really worthwhile emotional investment.
I appreciated when I first started transitioning, Master Mir said something at one of my first, you were down for investiture or something. And you said something that was completely offhand. I don't know that I even remember exactly what it was, but it made me feel like it was okay to do the thing that I was doing.
Yeah.
As I try to
That means Bird did right.
Yeah.
No, you have been great when you reached out to me and helping us all and getting into the memberships and groups, and I appreciate you on all the panels you have been on, helping out with people of minorities and other things, that you get us to connect with our community, and really, really appreciate what you've done for our communities. Anyone else have anything else to add to your essay and experience? Otherwise, I am going to move on to open questions.
I think there's
Cool.
some in the chat, but we might have to scroll back a bit.
Yeah, I had to dig. First question that I did note that someone asked. I don't have any experience with this in Ontario, thankfully. I've had more experience outside Ontario online, which has not been fun. But how do you how do you deal with people who are less accepting about the trans spectrum in general? in the SCA. Sammy.
So I have a story. So, former Kingdom Seneschal of the Midrealm. I'm friends with her. So she calls me up one night. I'm like, hey, what's up? Like, okay, first of all, why is Kaysen reaching out to me? What did I do now? Or what did I do that I probably don't know what's going on? I'm like, okay, what's up? I got a favor to ask. Okay, why is Kaysen asking me for a favor? So we have this event in a couple weeks. What's your schedule look like? Well, I have to work overnight, so I have to work overnight? What's going on? Well, we have some issues with an older demographic barony who is having some issues adapting to a young trans woman and respecting her identity. Can you come do the class? Looked at my schedule. I don't have any other plans for this day. I think I actually moved. I was supposed to go to a closer event, or one that was up in North Shield, but I redirected and went out to this barony that I got asked very nicely by the Kingdom Seneschal to go do a thing, because the Trans 101 class is literally, the first part of it is I explain all the basic gender definitions, and then we go into all the court stuff, and then we go into all the history, because it's that whole we've always existed. But more importantly, it's the interactions component that they really needed. So literally, we did a lunch and learn. Grab your lunch, grab a seat, let's sit down. I'm gonna take bites of food while Kaysen is like rambling about the things that she needs to. I'm gonna try and scoop up my food and then go. So it was a thing where I had most of this barony. I had all the barony's officers that they were required to attend the class, and we actually had a good chunk of the actual attendees from the event actually in my class, because oh hi, this actually sounds kind of interesting. So, yeah, that was a thing. So I basically was brought in as a low-level intervention as an educational opportunity to do the class and do the thing and explain why this does not jive. So that was a thing. And I have basically offered that to every Kingdom Seneschal I've worked with, is like, hey, if you need me to do a thing, I need at least 2 weeks notice so that I can make plans, because if they involve me taking a road trip or a plane ride, I need to get tickets or figure out accommodations. But I very much view it as this is the way that I can give back to the SCA. The SCA has created a space for me to be comfortable and grow. This is the way that I can pay it forward.
Thank you. So my experiences, I've actually not been trans and trying to deal with these people. It's actually been more on the neurodivergent and classism sides of stuff. So that's a whole different topic. Because I advocate a lot for inclusivity with peerages, and the big thing is about money differences, really, and how traveling can impact our game. But that is not part of the spectrum.
Intersectionality matters.
Okay, fine.
Trans people are less likely to be able to hold down a stable job.
Yep,
that is true.
And tend to be lower income. So, and also people of color. So yeah.
Health issues, all kinds of stuff.
I didn't even think to put all those connections, because in my brain it like makes sense, but my brain was like, those are separate categories, and that's just how
so do we want to discuss that a little bit, because that it is something that actually I feel needs to be discussed a little bit because of the intersectionality of it.
And I think it's a good segue from what the question is, of how can we include ourselves and things that we look at, especially in peerages. Like I definitely look at social anxieties, which again, trans people can have because we're trying to pass and we freak out. I do panic attacks on my own without being in public crowds, that I'm totally scared to go into public crowds again. Yay, social anxieties. Also, just being trans and gender dysphoria can cause those issues too. So yes, let's segue from that question and the other questions that this kind of does lead into, that of how we're trying to be inclusive because of trans people. I don't even want to know how much my doctor bill is right now. How much extra money we spend outside the SCA for therapy, medicine, doctor's appointments, blood draws. I think I had 1 month I did like $2,000 in doctor's bills, and I'm pretty low income for Washington. I'm doing okay, but I have multiple roommates because I have to. So that does lead into the intersectionality of classism and the problems that we have in peerages and traveling, and it's an extroverted game, and stuff like that, that I actually advocate in my own ways, because it's a game that we're all trying to enjoy, and we don't want to lose members to like HEMA or certain things where you don't need to really travel. You just need to pay a membership fee to get those awards and recognitions, as long as you pay the monthly fee. We have a yearly membership fee to help you get discounts, but this is the whole problem we're having with the leaky pipeline, as certain Maesters of Defense have done their own panels. If you want to read more just on gender minorities and non-conforming genders, that is a whole issue that I have been a part of, especially since Ontier has 2 female mods. So the peerage representation, that's why Mir and I decided to put on ours, to show that there are trans and there are peers, and we are trying to advocate and help understand the minorities in the SCA. This is why I'm also part of the ADI Council, to make sure pronouns get thought about. Other accessibilities like CPAP battery charging stations at places. I've been trying to figure out safe spaces for anxiety attacks and panic attacks and people that just need to walk away. And we're trying to figure out the legalities and all of that. certain things that are, I need to get away from this person, but who do I have, especially a new person? I've got households looking out for me since transitioning. I have people that understand, like, I have no idea how I'm going to experience my first adrenaline job, and I don't want people rushing me. So a lot of this education that we're doing is because of personal experience. We are not experts except on our own lives. I do have some experts that I know that are not a part of the SCA that I've done. Somebody that's doing a full research for her PhD program, and I interviewed with them about the trans spectrum in the SCA and as a second gen and everything. But I am going to start. Samii, are you here, or your video disappeared?
He said he'd be back.
Okay. Let's go. Bella, do you have anything you want to add to that? Because
Just conversations about intersectionality more broadly, or
yeah, so how trans spectrum, how we're trying to be more inclusive, especially when it comes to traveling and stuff, anxieties. I don't know a lot of trans people that don't have some sort of neurodivergency. So kind of that intersectionality, that of how we can be more inclusive with that. And if you can start and then pass it on to whoever after, I need to step away for a second.
Sure. So in general, I said this in the chat already, but I would love for us to be having more conversations explicitly devoted to intersectionality in general in the SCA, and also just in life. I don't think I had a reason to mention this prior to now, but I do DEI work in my professional life as well, and we're having a training about it actually next week, or this week. I'm excited about it. But so in general, I think this is such a great moment for thinking about these issues and talking about these issues, particularly given the sort of larger cultural events we've experienced over the past year. The number of emails that I personally have received about Pride that specifically discuss the context and history of Stonewall is such progress, in my opinion, about sort of the larger conversation we should be having. And I really would love to see the SCA moving in that direction as well. I do think it's important and it matters. I think there are a lot, we've touched on this already, but there are so many different ways that intersectionality can come up. And people's identities are multifaceted, right? People have many parts to themselves. And it's really valuable to honor that and create space for talking about and thinking about that and all the different ways that things intersect. Especially, we were talking about bathrooms a little bit earlier. It's not a coincidence that a lot of these states that have passed legislation that relates back to trans folks using bathrooms, those are also states that are passing all kinds of other legislation right now that are, yeah, a number of different places, unfortunately, are passing right now. And I think it's important for the SCA to be keeping up with that and to be thinking about that and to be talking about how to address that in a lot of different ways. Also, I see someone in the chat asked for definition of intersectionality. This was a term that was coined by, I want to say, Kimberly Crenshaw, that specifically is intended to discuss the ways in which different points of marginalization intersect and different ways in which having different forms of marginalization can impact a person and also can impact a conversation. Someone in the chat I just saw go by having disabilities and ethnicities. Oh, it was Mir, my apologies. Disabilities and ethnicities and identities on top of each other, which is a really good sort of basic framing of the idea of intersectionality. So these different things impact people in different but related ways. So you can't really fully tease out what comes from one versus what comes from the other, but they impact a person as a whole or impact communities as a whole, and impact our society as a whole.
Yeah. And one of the challenges and part of why we need not only allies, where we're starting to talk about co-conspirators, we need somebody who's in it with us. Is because, as you saw somebody mention with respect, if Samii had the energy for a conversation, because there's a certain energy that's expended in just daily life when you have one of those things that makes every little step, a little higher. Have you ever been in one of those old buildings where the stairs were like 11 inches instead of 7, and you have to step a little more? Okay. Some of us, there are extra steps, so we got to get 2 or 3 of those every time, and it's tiring. And so the question is how much energy you've got. Now, Samii's got more of those steps than I do because I'm white passing. Don't think that don't matter. Arnóra's got more steps than I do because she's now getting some of those female extra mileage. I, on the other hand, am having to learn to push less strongly because I now get all the male points. So I have to put less of my own points on that, and I'm actually spending energy trying not to go blast somebody. And all of these things intersect and interact. And so when I'm dealing with all of those burdens, and then I see somebody in leathers and feathers at a demo, I don't know what I'm going to get. I don't know if that's just become massively unsafe to me, or if that's somebody who actually knows what they're doing and just being respectful. And my eek just spikes. And at that point, you're not getting a pelican. You're getting an Indian who's just waiting for the crab to come. And that's that intersectionality thing that we're talking about. In just a...
I'd like to add that I think it was this year that I learned that intersectionality is the marginalization, not the privileges. A lot of us who are in more privileged spaces who are white think of, oh, well, if you're white and male, then you have intersecting privileges. But it was originally about marginalization. I remember reading about it was originally a legal case where someone didn't get hired because, it was about a hiring because they only hired Black men and white women, Black men for the labor type job and white women for the secretary type
office,
jobs. And office jobs. And there was a Black woman who didn't get hired because she didn't fit either of those things. And they were trying to say, well, it's not racist because they do hire Black people, and it's not sexist because they do hire women, but they had 0 Black women. And so intersectionality is looking at how those, you get sort of double jeopardy based on race, sex, class, gender,
Physical ability. Like, that's one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot right now, because at my work, I'm on one of the committees for, like, how are we going to allow people back in the building now that we're kind of seeing numbers go down? And we're trying to include things like, no, you should continue to have a Zoom option. There are a lot of people for which this is a huge accessibility issue. If you can, continue to let people work from home. Like, this is, it's a huge accessibility issue. And a lot of disabled people are seeing gains that they have made in the last year just completely evaporate because regular people don't need it anymore.
Correct.
Yes.
That's been on my mind.
Yeah. And I should be clear, just in case I wasn't in what I said, that the fact that I now have all these mail points is not a piece of my intersectionality. It is, in fact, a piece of emotional labor I owe my community. Guess what, y'all? Every iota privilege we have is something we owe learning to wield and not wield and wield gently.
Yes, which also helps in the SCA and stuff too. I know we're talking about work and stuff, trying to keep it SCA. Anyways, and peerages and everything is trying to look at all those intersections.
It's still a privilege.
It's still a privilege. It's like yes, I got it presenting male, but I had so many social anxieties and a lower income bracket that I specifically chose my mod, who was in a better place and very extroverted, to help me look extroverted and look like I could travel, when really I carpooled with like 6 people, because that's sometimes how I could afford getting around on tier, because from north to south could easily be a 24-hour drive. I wish I was joking. And we're not even including border. No, we're not even including border or big city traffic like Seattle and Portland that you drive through at I-5. That could add another 4 hours to 5 hours to that trip because of rush hour. Yay. But anyways, but it's a big thing. It's a big problem. And some of us that are in positions of privilege, that we understand that we have certain privileges, but we still lack a lot of other privileges. Like, I don't have the funds or sometimes even the spoons. Like, today was really hard to do, but I knew I had to do it. So there's a lot of those things that social, like having to as a term that Brigitte and I always use is about buckets with holes in them that you're constantly filling up with water. But the hole is in the bottom, and depending on how quickly you fill it will depend on how much water is in that bucket. And this is how we view peerages as a whole, because yes, we want you to be specifically good in a marshal peerage for the marshalate that you're going after. Laurels are kind of like trying to figure out service for pelicans, blah, blah, blah. So our big thing is, what I'm trying to get out of that bucket is travel, because you can have a huge impact on the kingdom locally. That is what I've been trying to say, but that's for a totally different project. Does anyone have anything else to add to this? I know I'm looking at the time, and I'm sure our East Coast folks would probably like to head to bed soon.
This high school teacher on the West Coast would like to head to bed soon too.
Me too. I gotta get up at 5:30 in the morning on my own time, so it's like, yay. Do we have anything to add to intersectionality? Does anyone words? Does anyone have any more last minute questions? Remember, disclaimers: if you know they're trans, don't out them. They have a privy to you knowing that information. And it's very safe to ask everyone, what pronouns do you go by, so I can properly address you.
And I'm actually going to note too with that, like, it doesn't necessarily have to be pronouns, but also a name. Like,
yes,
ask just how do you want to be addressed.
Cool. I want to thank all of you again. Anna unfortunately couldn't be here, but she was going to be another marshalate trans after getting elevated. which has been interesting in our own little experience world of that. But I want to thank you all for volunteering. I really appreciate Lions Den and Lionsgate for hosting our Zoom social and doing their EDI stuff throughout the year. As you can go and find their YouTube channel, they have one earlier on the queer spectrum that Master Pierce down in Medford, which we both laughed that there was 2 Master of Defenses and on tier running these things. But we're working really hard, at least in the Master of Defense, to be very inclusive since we are brand new and we get to define how we want it to be. So you hear me, Brigit, Illidor, and a lot of other big names out there in the Maester of Defense panels that are out there also to kind of help with gender minorities, mostly focus on the femme side of things. But yeah, all I know for me personally, I am Roxanne Skeltema on Facebook. You can find me with Rosa Marcella as a search. You can find me on the invite that you guys looked at, and you can totally friend me. I'm totally open to new friends for educating. My wall talks a lot about neurodivergencies, trans spectrum, euphoria, dysphoria. Like my wall is very, and then I have a lot of dad jokes, so get ready for those.
So many dad jokes.
So many.
I just wanted to thank everyone so much for coming out and sharing your truth and your perspectives and your experience. I definitely learned a lot. I learned a lot more than I thought I was going to learn, which is awesome. I really appreciate it. I think now what we'll do is we'll stop the recording, and we can take everybody off.